start to finish, just give me the whole scoop.
Definitely want to learn what your batteries are. There are several different types of batteries out there that you can go ahead and get. I think the best ones, in my opinion, is IMRs. But IMRs are not all the same. You also got to check for what their amp limit is on them, because if you're trying to do some sub-ohms, you're going to go ahead and hurt yourself. Some
Which
batteries
most of us are into now.
Most of us,
Sub-ohms.
yeah. Once you go ahead and go from going from a single ohm coil, you're now coming from an experience. Now you're going into hobbiness.
Mhm.
Hobbyist. It's totally different. You're taking it advanced and you're going past it. When you're doing hobbyists, we're going ahead just like me. We like to go ahead and try to see what we can do. But again, got to have good batteries. There's several different ones out there. We have eFest. You've got your VTC4s. You've got new ones out Emron right now. You've got different styles of them, battery tops and whatnot, protected batteries. Protected batteries are great for if you're using for a, you're staying away from being sub-ohm. You're going ahead and using a mechanical,
Variable voltage.
variable voltage.
Yeah.
Once you do variable voltage, you can go ahead and you can use just about any battery you want, because you're not usually sub-ohming them.
So now that, because you said that, would it be okay to use one of the Emrons that are the Sony VTC5s in a variable voltage as well?
It's fine.
Just kind of cross the board.
It'll make
But-
it so it's more safe.
Right, but your lower button tops would be more geared toward that, but you shouldn't run the button top low amp in a mechanical if I'm going sub-ohm, right?
Correct.
Because me being an enthusiast,
You're
you know.
most of the times you're going to do flat top.
right,
But again, you got to make sure that you know what your limit is.
right.
Because like this is an IMR battery also, but this has only got a 10 amp draw,
Right.
maximum discharge. Once you go ahead, and it's fine if you're staying above 1 ohm. As soon as you go below 1 ohm, you're going to go ahead and tax the actual battery. You want to stay about 80% of what your battery limit is. If it says it's 20 amps, you can go pretty low. But
So I think part of the message here would be is if you're going sub-ohm, it's cool to blow clouds and come into a shop that is full service, such as VapeNJoe, and say, hey, I want to blow clouds.
right,
However, it would behoove me as a consumer to do some research as well.
Definitely.
To kind of educate myself, because if I just walk in and say I want to blow clouds, I get a mechanical device, I get a sub-ohm wrap, say in a full service shop such as this, and then I go out and I blow clouds, but my battery dies. So what do? I go to the closest shop and I pick up a battery. It might not be good for what I'm using because not everybody knows, so it's probably in my best interest to do some research.
yes, definitely do research on your battery. I mean, yes, you can go on to like eBays and stuff like that, and you can pick up batteries for like $4.99.
Right.
But it's not made to vape
Right.
because your amp limit is so low.
Right.
Like I said, this one's a 10 amp maximum draw. This one here, M&KE, they're 30 amps. You can go all the way up to 40 amps.
Right.
35. They've got 35s,
Right.
which makes it so that it's more safe.
Right.
You can go down to 0.5, 0.3s,
Right.
and stuff like that. Or you can go even lower. I don't always say to do that because, again, it's not always that safe.
And those batteries, I mean, what they're mostly made for is flashlights, is what I understand, right?
Correct.
So, as a rechargeable flashlight, anybody can use them.
Right.
However, people are starting to market them and use them in these mechanical and variable voltage devices
Some of them
based
are.
on the industry growing where it is. So, we're crossing industries, I guess.
Exactly.
From flashlights to vape devices or nicotine delivery devices. So, it'd probably be best to, do the research on it.
And try to get the best battery you can afford.
Right.
Just don't go ahead and say, oh, well, I can get 3 of these batteries for $4.99. It may not be a great battery. And if there's chances that the battery will not handle it, and you're going to start asking questions. Why is my mod getting extremely hot? Why is my button getting really hot? If you notice anything like that, stop what you're doing. take the battery out.
Right, so it's worth it to spend the extra couple of bucks to get something you know is safe.
Right. I
At
mean,
the
most
recommendation of somebody
batteries, like a
running.
10 amp one, you're gonna go ahead and hit maybe 2 or 3 times, real quick, seconds, 2 or 3 seconds. But you get a Ameren 40 amp battery, you're gonna go ahead and be able to hit 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds on a 0.5 build, no problem.
Right,
And you're never gonna notice that you're not taxing the battery. The battery actually is, it's made to do that.
right.
If you go ahead and you're trying to do it on a 10 amp battery, a 7 amp battery, the battery is going to get hot and could vent.
So when you're talking about mAhs, what's the difference between a 1600 mAh and a 2200 mAh? What is that all about?
It's the amount of battery life it basically has. The higher the limit, a lot of times you can go ahead and get ones that are, the lower they say is better when you're going ahead. But now they're coming out with the new VTC4s and VTC5s that are actually higher milliamp, which is battery life, how long it actually, the batteries can hold power.
Oh, okay.
So the higher the mAh, the better the battery as far as lasting?
Lasts longer. It's not really mAh, it's milliamp per hour, but yes, everybody says
Milliamp
mAh.
hours, right.
Right.
But they don't call it mAh, I know.
But it's the amount of battery life it's got.
Okay.
The higher is sometimes better for, like, say, if you've got your variable voltage, just go ahead and you want to go ahead and get the higher ones you can get. If you're not sub-ohming, have battery life. I mean, that's the way to go.
So if you are sub-ohming, what would be a safe mAh or milliamp hour to be at? I mean, the
Does it-
higher the better still?
Not necessarily. It just depends on what you're trying to achieve.
Okay.
It's more towards your amps.
Right.
40 amp, 35 amp, 30 amp. That's where you need if you're going sub-ohm. You got to go ahead and get a higher milliamp. I mean, the higher amperage.
Okay. Now, does higher amperage necessarily mean shorter battery life?
Not necessarily, because again, you've got your VTC 3s. There were 1600 milliamps. Your 4s were, I think it was 20 or 2000, and then the 5s I think are 22.5 or something.
Okay.
So it doesn't really. They're coming out with more and more batteries that are. The technology is getting better. Most of the people, when I first started, 16 milliamp was like the best
Right.
that you can get
Right.
for sub-ohming.
So anything there or above would be good with a higher amp, based on, you know, what the amperage is and the total milliamp.
Right.
You want both as high as you can get them within
Right.
reason on a sub.
And again, get what you can afford. If you
Right.
can go ahead, the best you can afford, possibly afford,
Okay.
to be safe. Going ahead and, like I said, buying a cheap battery, it could do some weird things.
Right.
Got a question for you. What about double stacking?
You
Is it
can
safe?
double stack things, but the thing is that you gotta understand math. Math is what's gonna help you with this. It's your Ohm's law calculator. It's gonna help you out tremendously on that. When you're stacking, yes, there is a lot of mods now that are stacking, but if it's pulling a 12 amp draw and you stack it, then it's gonna be 24 amps that it's gonna be pulling. If you're not using a VTC4 or something that's high milliamp, you go ahead and throw this 10 amp, put a 10 amp on top of it,
Right.
you're pulling 24 amps, which is more than this battery can handle.
So at any point, would I want to take and hit dual 30s and get 60 out of it, just to benefit my build?
Can,
Would it be something I would want to do?
if you want more power, yes.
Yeah, okay.
But again, when you go ahead and you stack them, you're risking a lot, then things.
Right.
you
know, the
don't- when you
mentality
stack-
is the bigger the better, the more the better, you know? so
Right,
you
but when
think,
you
"Oh, I got
stack, you don't
16."
normally go, then it's a totally different mentality than you
Right.
would think of. When you stack, it doesn't pertain to, oh, hey, I'm going sub-ohm.
Right.
2 amp, 3 amp, 2 amp or 3 amp like ohms is what
Right.
your target is when you're starting to stack things. It's a totally different effect because you're getting more volts instead
But
of
you want to go with
now.
a higher ohm resistance coil,
Correct,
because
you're
you're
gonna go
pumping
ahead-
that power into it much faster.
because you're also changing from 3.7, you're doubling it.
So
Now
what's the
you're going
benefit
6
of having a sub-ohm coil?
on stacking.
Yeah, what,
You
on
won't.
anything, on anything?
It will heat up your coil faster.
Okay.
In turn, they say makes it better. But again, there are several different things when you're going for clouds. It's not necessarily always resistance. How low can you go is not always the thing.
So you can go with a higher ohm resistance
You can,
and still get the cloud.
yes,
And how would somebody achieve that?
air. When you go ahead and most of your coils, if you got a stock top, don't go sub ohm. It's going to get so hot it's going to actually burn your throat. The air, and then you won't actually produce the cloud.
Right.
It's going to get to the point where it's going to get too hot. You're not going to be able to produce.
Right.
If your variables when you're going ahead and trying to do clouds, you want the best battery you can get, highest amp battery you can get. Coil, you can range between 1 and 0.7. You can even go down to 0.2. But again, then you're gonna the other variable is air. If you don't get the air, you're not gonna go ahead and make the cloud. It's just not gonna work.
So, say I walk into a shop and I go, I want something that blows clouds.
Right.
What would be a great standard or base for a beginner to have? Somebody just starting out.
As in what, the
A
mod?
mechanical mod.
Definitely mechanical
What
mod.
kind of coil?
When you're just starting out,
Yeah.
again, 0.7 to 0.9 will do just fine
With good air.
with good air.
And a 30 amp battery.
30 amp battery. Then again, once you go ahead and do that, then you got this entry level. Start increasing that air, and the cloud's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. It's just a good start.
Right.
A good top will work great.
So I'd increase the air, increase my knowledge, obviously, because
It's also,
it's
I mean,
simple
when
to walk
clouds,
into a shop and go, hey, I want to blow clouds, I want a bigger cloud, I want a bigger cloud, I want a bigger cloud. But I think at some point, something we fail to discuss in the industry is educate.
right,
Educate
Everything.
and research.
Definitely. Do
A
your
lot
due
of people,
diligence.
when you can walk into a shop and say, I want to blow bigger clouds, but the education piece and the research is key in all of it, because, yeah, a vape shop can wrap your coil, most, reputable ones will, but, it's not always up to them, because once you leave, it's you've got to know your research. You got to be able to fly on your own or take up the training at some point.
right. Definitely.
So, it's definitely something that I think people need to do research on, and you've obviously done yours, so. And you're not going to be able to talk about every little variable in the device portion of it, so I know we got some certain areas that we need to, do research on as individuals who are doing it. But, so I see you got some big ones there, like wider ones, and what's the difference between those, the wider
The bigger
devices
battery,
and
it's just,
batteries?
a lot of them, again, when you go into the bigger ones also, a lot of them, their amp limits go even higher. So then you can do sub-ohms, and you can do it longer. Again, EFES makes a 35 milliamp, which blows away most of your 18650s. And it's a 64 max pull amp limit. It's 32 quickly. Most of your 30s and whatnot are 30s. These start out at 32 as a burst, and you can go ahead and all the way up to 64. I like the bigger ones. I like the smaller ones. It just depends on the day that I'm working on something. And they all work. They just seem to have more technology right now in the smaller 18650 batteries over the 26650 batteries. They are coming up and starting. Months ago, there were only 30 amp, 60 amp EFES 26650s. But you get more power. And all.
Wonderful. Anything else you want to add in regards to safety and battery and
This
maybe
battery that I
builds?
keep playing with, the wrap, again, it's coming apart. If you notice your battery is coming apart like this, you can do one of two things. Get rid of the battery, like I should, or go ahead and rewrap it, because that actually is what gives you your safety. Your negative is the casing. Your positive is the top. So if you're going ahead and the top of your battery is falling apart or bottom of your battery is falling apart, you're going to make a connection that you don't want.
Right. So if it's torn or ripped anywhere on that battery casing, it's a potential hazard.
It is potential.
Whether it's halfway down or up at the top or up at the bottom
Correct.
or whatever.
Exactly.
Okay. So when I am using it, what would you say is a safe voltage to keep using that battery at before I put it on my charger?
The lowest I would go is 3.6. But you can go
3.6.
down to 3.2, but if you go too low, then you can kill that battery. You can go ahead and buy a brand new battery, spend $20 for the battery and not watching what you're doing.
Right.
And when it drops off too low, and then you ruin the battery.
So there's one thing that I hear a lot about right now, and hopefully you can expand on it a little bit, and it deals with venting.
Venting.
What does that term venting a battery mean?
Basically, you're dead shorting the battery, or going below its, or going above what it's capable of doing. In turn, it'll heat up and short. That's why I said this is not a good thing, because if it's in your pocket with something, it'll get so hot and it'll literally expel the fluid out of it.
So that's what venting is,
venting.
when it expels the fluid?
Right.
Okay, because some of the mechanical mods I've seen like holes drilled in
Right.
to let them vent, but I've also heard of the term venting. I've vented a battery, or be careful, you might vent that battery.
Right. That's when you're going beyond your battery's capability.
Okay. So there's a potential hazard for that.
Right. Again, you can go ahead and that's why you got, when you're building, have somebody that have knowledge when you're building, because if you direct short out your battery, you can go ahead and it could potentially become a hazard. And that's why I don't like people going too low of sub-ohming, because it doesn't always, if you don't know what you're doing, it's not safe anymore.
Right.
Got to have the knowledge, got to have the understanding of what you're doing to do it. The holes in a lot of mods, they have holes for venting, because if you go too low, or if there's a case that it does short out,
Right.
it has a way to expel, so it doesn't become too tight.
Okay. So with all that said, we've kind of discussed a lot of stuff. Anything else that you can think that we might add to the conversation so everybody's vaping safe?
Do research on what you're doing when you're building, so that you can go ahead and have knowledge of what you're doing, so you don't do anything that could potentially hurt you.
Something you're going to pay for.
Something you're paid for.
All right. Well, VapeNJoe would like to thank you for your time. We appreciate you coming out and talking about it.
No problem.
And hopefully this does a lot of people some good.
Yes.
Thank you.